Hello and welcome to the History of Modern Greece. I'm your host, Daniel Roberts, and I'm here with my father, George, and our theme music is brought to you by Mark Youngerman. This is a podcast that covers the events from the fall of ancient Greece to the modern day. This is episode 24, Crisis of the 3rd Century.
For centuries, the Roman Empire existed in relative stability. The term Pax Romana refers to the Roman peace, which generally lasted from 27 BCE to 180 CE. United under one banner, peace and prosperity reigned from England to Morocco, and all the way to Iraq and the Persian Gulf. It is at this time that grapes were introduced to Britain and Germany. Referring to our central Greenland temperatures chart, we can see that there was a warm period on Earth that peaked around 50 BCE. The same period that saw the rise of the Roman Republic was when the Emperor Qin unified all of China. And although the Qin dynasty only lasted for 2 decades, the Han dynasty inherited the empire and ruled over in what is called the Golden Age of Chinese history. The two empires traded with each other across a land route in Central Asia known as the Silk Road. Tucked between the two great empires was a new power on the board. The Parthian Empire had conquered the lands of the Seleucids and abolishing all traces of the Greek overlords that had invaded their lands with Alexander the Great. They were now getting rich by taxing all of the trade that went between the Chinese and Roman empires. Whether it was stability of the three powers that ruled from the Atlantic to the Pacific, that led to the Golden Age, or the Great Warm Period, or both, it is pretty clear that there was prosperity from England all the way to China.
The Roman Empire set up trade with India through the ocean trade network, through the Red Sea, and across the open Indian Ocean. The ships would launch from the province of Judea into the Red Sea and sail all the way down to the tip of the Arabian Peninsula, where they would stop in an oasis port city and resupply their vessels with water and food. These trading routes had been established by the Greeks during the first voyage commissioned from Alexander the Great, and had been properly charted over the next several centuries. Once they knew the geography of the Indian coastline, they attempted their first voyage across the open sea. Relying on the powerful and predictable monsoon winds, the Roman vessels would ride the strong ocean current to the coast of India. It took roughly 70 days for the Romans to travel 3,000 miles to their destination, and once they were there, they couldn't return until the winds blew in the opposite direction. When the voyagers arrived in India, they knew they were close because the color of the ocean changed as the fresh water from the Indus Valley flowed into the ocean, changing its color. From the coast, the trading vessels would sail upriver to the Indo-Parthian capital of Minigar, where they would unload their goods and pay their taxes to the king. From here they would trade in goods such as silk, fine glass, and silverware. One of the highest prized goods the Romans had to offer was glass. The Roman glass was crystal clear and of a much higher quality glass than the East could produce, who could only achieve milky and opaque glass. The Roman traders even brought goods they picked up in Arabia and Africa, such as perfumes and gemstones. Another prized good the Romans had to offer the traders in the East was the red coral of the Mediterranean Sea. This coral was highly prized for its vibrant red color that never faded when it was taken out of the ocean and dried, and the Indians would use it for adornment. From this port, the Romans could return with spices, plant-based drugs, silks, and precious stones from all over Central Asia, as well as India and China. Further trade routes took the Romans down the Indian subcontinent, where kingdoms were ruled by Indian kings who were not part of the Parthian Empire, and from here emissaries traveled across the Indian Ocean and met with the Roman emperors. One of these Indian kings even sent a request to the Roman Empire to team up and crush the Parthian Empire from both flanks. But the Romans had just signed a peace treaty and they were not about to break it now. Because of this valuable trade network, many Roman citizens walked around the Roman streets in Europe wearing jewels that had made the voyage all the way from Indian mines and silks made in China. In return, the wealthy in China and India decorated their kingdoms with clear and light glass ornaments and Mediterranean red coral.
If you look at the central Greenland temperatures chart, you will see there hasn't been a global temperature this high since the height of the Minoan civilization, at the end of the Bronze Age around 1300 BCE. However, this warming period that peaked in the 1st century BCE started to collapse, and over the next 300 years would lead into a colder and drier period. This gradual drop in temperature also led to what historians refer to as the crisis of the 3rd century, which led to internal strife of the Roman Empire until it eventually fractured into several smaller pieces. Coincidentally, this is the same time the Han Dynasty in China collapsed and fractured into 3 smaller kingdoms. During this period, the Roman Empire suffered multiple civil wars, famine, and even plagues. Christianity spread like wildfire throughout the empire, and for a while it looked like the empire was going to completely collapse. It literally felt like the end of the world.
In 180 CE, the great emperor Marcus Aurelius died and passed the throne on to his son Commodus. Commodus's reign started out good, but by the end of it he had developed into a paranoid and cruel tyrant. He was famous for killing tens of thousands of people in the Colosseum, most of them injured, sick, or weak. In 192 CE, Commodus was assassinated in the bathtub. The crisis afterwards led to a time which is known as the Year of the Five Emperors. In 193 CE, the Severan dynasty came to power in Rome, and the military was doubled in size, and their pay increased. This meant that there would have to be even more taxation on the people, and this need to pay more soldiers, even more money, led to the practice of plating cheap metal with silver to pay their soldiers, which led to inflation. Now, Romans didn't have any idea what inflation was, but they were about to find out the hard way. In 220 CE, the Han dynasty collapsed. And in 224 CE, the Parthian Empire collapsed and was replaced by a new dynasty called the Sassanids. Historians have termed this empire the Neo-Persian Empire, but we will refer to them as Sassanids or Persians. The Sassanids were practicing Zoroastrians and rejected Christianity as a Roman religion, despite having a substantial amount of Christians present in their empire.
In 232 CE, the last Severan emperor Alexander took his army on campaign to the eastern border to deal with Sassanid invasions into their territory. Despite winning this war and pushing the Sassanids out of their eastern provinces, Alexander's army began to revolt against him. In 235 CE, Emperor Alexander was assassinated by his own legionnaires, ending the Severan dynasty. This started the crisis of the 3rd century. In this period, the Roman Empire found itself facing more enemies on more fronts than ever before. The neighbors along the outer edges of the empire knew of the wealth inside the empire, and they were increasingly suffering from food shortages and drought and violence, and they saw the weakened imperial lands as ripe for the taking. The Goths, the Vandals, Franks, and even the Sassanids started invading the outer edges of the Roman Empire. In 252 CE, the Sassanids invaded the eastern provinces of Syria and conquered right up to the Mediterranean Sea, taking Antioch and Palmyra. In 259 CE, Valerian and his men crossed into Anatolia to deal with the Sassanid Empire, when an invading army of Goths sailed across the Black Sea and raided into the Roman provinces of Anatolia, halting Valerian's march on the Sassanids so he could go deal with the invading Goths. Once the Goths fled Anatolia, Valerian continued his march across Anatolia to fight the Persians in the eastern provinces. Valerian's 70,000 Roman legionnaires met the 40,000 Persians in Syria and were utterly defeated. Valerian became the first Roman emperor to be captured alive in battle. The sudden loss of Valerian meant the throne belonged to his son, who found himself in the middle of a rebellion almost immediately.
In 260 CE, the new Emperor Gallienus, son of Valerian, fought in the civil war to secure the throne, and while he was distracted, a full-scale invasion occurred in the province of Gaul, and the Franks and Alemanni raided into modern-day France, pillaging and wreaking havoc as they went. Emperor Gallienus marched in haste to meet the invaders in Gaul, and although they were greatly outnumbered, their cavalry ushered in a stunning victory against the invading armies. Although he was able to put out one fire in Gaul, the rest of the northern provinces erupted into full-scale rebellion as the invaders continued to plunder the northern provinces. The Roman general Postumus rebelled against the emperor and declared Britannia and Gaul to be independent, and was later coined by historians as the Gallic Empire. While the emperor was dealing with civil wars in eastern provinces, the traitor Postumus invaded Hispania and annexed it to his new empire. Spain, France, and Britain were now lost to the Romans. All the while, the Sassanids were invading the eastern provinces and taking more and more territory for themselves.
In 262 CE, a Roman nobleman from Palmyra rose up and led an army to Edessa, defeating the Persian invaders and reclaiming all of the Roman territory lost to the Persians. The Roman nobleman Odenathus chased the Persians back to their capital of Ctesiphon. Despite remaining loyal to the Roman emperor, Odenathus challenged the Sassanid right to rule and declared himself the king of kings. With relative stability on the eastern provinces, the emperor was able to focus his attention west and went to recover his lost provinces. In 265 CE, the emperor went to war with the traitor general Postumus and was defeated twice. These defeats solidified the Gallic Empire and weakened Emperor Gallienus in the eyes of his soldiers. In 267 CE, Odenathus was assassinated in Anatolia, and his widow became regent until their son was old enough to rule. In 268 CE, Emperor Gallienus was assassinated, and Claudius II took the throne. His first objective was to reclaim the lost provinces to the west, but there was a Gothic invasion from the east into the provinces north of Greece. In 269 CE, Emperor Claudius marched his army and met the Gothic invaders in Issus, modern-day Serbia, and defeated the Goths in such a crushing victory that it halted the Gothic invasion from that frontier for several decades. Upwards of 50,000 Goths were killed or sold into slavery. In the same year, Claudius led his army north and halted another invasion from the Alemanni tribe on the borders of Gaul. Postumus, the traitor general, died that year. In 270 CE, Emperor Claudius II took advantage of the weak ruler of the new Gallic Empire and invaded the province of Hispania, taking it back into the empire. Unfortunately, he was struck by the plague on campaign and died in Spain. In 271 CE, the widow of Odysseus invaded Egypt and declared her son emperor of the eastern provinces of what was coined the Palmyrene Empire.
The new emperor of Rome, Aurelius, was under a lot of stress, as his once great empire was falling apart right before his eyes. There were now two usurpers, and with the loss of Egypt, his grain supply was cut off. Not to mention the barbarian tribes from the north kept invading the northern provinces. With no chance of taking back all those provinces, Aurelius had to focus his effort on the home front. He started by attacking each Germanic tribe individually, expelling them from northern Italy. As long as Aurelius was focusing all his efforts on a single problem, he was able to deal with it. One by one, the Germanic tribes were expelled. In 272 CE, Aurelius focused his attention on Egypt. He needed to get his grain shipments back if he were to prevent a complete internal collapse and famine. He marched through Anatolia, Syria, and down into Egypt, and within a year, the usurper was dealt with and the eastern provinces returned once again to the Roman Empire and the grain shipments resumed. In 274 CE, Emperor Aurelius marched north into Gaul and attacked the usurper there. And in the Battle of Chalons, he defeated the Gallic Empire and returned those provinces back to Rome. Once again, the empire was back together, and it was because of the work of Aurelius. However, that didn't mean he had complete control over the empire. His forces were spread thin, and plague and famine still ravaged through the empire. Not to mention, the Germanic tribes were still on their borders, and were still ready to invade at the first sign of weakness. Emperor Aurelius was going to need to come up with a long-term plan to keep control over his empire. In 275, Emperor Aurelius died. Over the next 9 years, the empire broke down and went through 6 different emperors. The crisis of the 3rd century that looked like it was getting under control flared up again.
In 284 CE, Diocletian came to power. If it weren't for Diocletian, the empire would not have survived the crisis of the 3rd century. Diocletian saved the Roman Empire. Diocletian needed to come up with a way to save the empire from crumbling. And one of the things he did was create a new tax code, which saw a fair and balanced system that made sure everyone paid, and not just the peasants. Even the people working for the state had to pay their fair share. Inflation was destroying the empire, and so his tax plan involved everyone paying their taxes with a portion of their goods or services. If there was a pig farmer, his taxes would be paid with a percentage of his pigs, just like a textile worker would pay his taxes with a portion of his goods. Next, Diocletian broke up the large provinces of the empire into several smaller provinces, making them easier to govern and less likely for a governor to accumulate enough power to challenge the emperor. He even signed a peace treaty with the Sassanids. He also ordered the people of the empire to make sacrifices to the god Jupiter in order to regain his favor, for certainly the gods must be angry with Rome to forsake them now. All citizens were ordered to light a candle at a temple, and in turn they would receive a token saying they did their duty for the empire. There was one group that flat out refused to follow this new edict, and that was the Christians. Their refusal to sacrifice to the god Jupiter angered Emperor Diocletian, as he was doing everything in his power to keep the empire from crumbling. And this once small but now growing cult of Christians was refusing to help out, even though the rules made it very easy to get the token. In fact, all they had to do was light a candle in a temple, and they could have been fine. But their refusal led the emperor to persecute them and order the death of thousands of Christians.
In 293 CE, Diocletian created what is known as the Tetrarchy. This was the dividing of the empire into east and west, with each getting their own emperor, or Augustus, and each declaring their heir, Caesar. The role of Augustus was that of the emperor, and the role of the Caesar was kind of like a vice-emperor. This meant that each could rule over their respective territories and repel any invasion with their own local armies. This allowed the empire to handle barbaric invasions rather quickly, and also prevented any sudden deaths from creating a power vacuum that would lead to another civil war. This year marks the end of the crisis of the 3rd century, and allowed the empire to continue as a whole for almost another 200 years. In 303 CE, the 2 emperors, Diocletian and Maximian, as well as a military commander named Constantine, attended a celebration in Rome to commemorate the 20th anniversary of Diocletian's rule. In 305 CE, the Emperor Diocletian fell ill and conceded the throne to a Caesar, Galerius, proving that a peaceful transition of power within the Tetrarchy was possible. This peaceful transition of power from Augustus to Caesar went just as Diocletian had hoped. Now all that had to happen to maintain peace was for Galerius to appoint a new Caesar. Naturally, Constantine, the favorite of Diocletian and son of Constantius, the Caesar of the Western Roman Empire, thought he was going to get picked for the job. However, Galerius ignored Constantine and instead chose his son to be Caesar. Because of the rules of the Tetrarchy, the Western Roman Emperor was forced to step down with Diocletian and elevate Constantius from Caesar to Augustus. Instead of promoting Maximian's son to Caesar, Galerius intervened and had a puppet installed as the Caesar of the West, breaking the trust of the other emperors as this went against the rules of the Tetrarchy. In the summer of 305, Constantius called his son from the east to join him on campaign against the Picts in northern Britannia. This was an opportunity to introduce his son to the military, which was a good thing too because Constantius fell ill and died the next year. In 306 CE, after Constantius died, his military declared Constantine the new emperor. With the chaos between Constantine and the contender to the throne, an uprising in Rome led by the son of the old emperor Maximian declared himself ruler of Rome, Sicily, and North Africa. This treason led to the emperor in the east, Galerius, to declare war on the Western Roman Empire. Traveling from Constantinople to Rome, Galerius went to wage war with the usurper Maxentius, but was disappointed when half of his army deserted him to join Maxentius behind the Roman walls. So now there were 3 men claiming the title of emperor.
In 311 CE, Emperor Galerius died of an illness, and the power vacuum meant the empire was about to slip into another full-scale civil war. Constantine saw Christianity as the perfect religion for the empire, as it followed the same structure as the empire had in its glory days. Because of the crisis of the 3rd century and the Tetrarchy, Rome had become an empire of several emperors. The time for multiple gods and multiple emperors was over. Constantine was going to unify the empire under the Christian religion, one God, one emperor. The pagan sources on Constantine speak a different story. They say that because Constantine had murdered his wife and son, he was desperate to find a priest that would forgive him. All of the pagan priests refused to forgive Constantine for such a heinous crime. But the Christian priests did offer forgiveness, and this is why Constantine took on the Christian faith. There is a good reason to believe the pagans who wrote this had an axe to grind with Constantine, so take it with a grain of salt. But Constantine did in fact murder his wife and son.
In 312 CE, Constantine converted to Christianity in a dramatic way. He was about to face his contender in battle, Augustus Maxentius. The winner would be the sole ruler of the Western Roman Empire. The story goes that Constantine did not feel good about the battle. He felt that events were lining up in his opponent's favor, especially since Maxentius had his armies behind the walls of Rome, while Constantine and his army remained camped on the opposite side of the Tiber. Constantine was looking desperately for some divine help. He was raised with the Roman god Jupiter, but decided to turn to the Christian god for favor. He ordered his men to paint the Greek letters Chi and Rho, which were the first 2 letters when spelling Christ in Greek. The symbol looks like an X with a P written over top. In the official story written by Eusebius, Constantine saw a vision in the sky of a cross with the inscription, "Conquer by this." And he swore an oath that he and his soldiers saw it. And so he had his soldiers paint the first 2 letters of Jesus' name on his shields, and he told his men that God was on their side. Constantine's army was greatly outnumbered by Maxentius, but Maxentius could always wait behind the Roman walls for Constantine's men to suffer from dysentery and give up their siege. But instead, he had a brilliant idea of marching his soldiers out to meet Constantine's army in battle. Seeing the advantage of trapping his men behind a river, Maxentius ordered his troops across the bridge and to set up formation on the other side of the river, putting his army in a position where retreat was literally impossible. He thought it would be a great way to motivate his men to win the battle. With overwhelming numbers, Constantine managed to surround his enemy and break their cavalry lines, forcing them to flee in panic to get across the bridge. This created a huge bottleneck, and many fell into the river. Maxentius himself attempted to swim across the Tiber and was swept away and drowned. There was one army of Maxentius that did not flee and continued to fight against Constantine despite being completely surrounded. And yet they were ultimately spared by Constantine for their bravery. The rest of Maxentius' army was killed on the battlefield or attempting to cross the bridge. Constantine marched on Rome and declared himself emperor of the Western Roman Empire. Because Constantine painted his shields with the letters of Jesus Christ and prayed to the Christian God before the battle, his victory was seen as a victory of Christianity over paganism. And ever since, this battle has become an important date in Christian lore.
In 313 CE, the Eastern Emperor Licinius, who was a staunch pagan but ally to Constantine, defeated his rival and declared himself Augustus of the Eastern Empire. There were now two emperors only, one in the east and one in the west for the time being. They were allies and brothers-in-law. However, Licinius was very superstitious, and when he saw the painted shields on Constantine's army, he freaked out. And this reaction had a negative effect on the morale of his troops. Despite their religious differences, this led to a short period of stability in the empire. The alliance was doomed to fail as Emperor Licinius was a pagan, and he soon started to persecute the Christians in the Eastern Empire. In 324 CE, Constantine invaded the Eastern Empire and fought Licinius at the Battle of Chrysopolis. When he defeated Licinius, Constantine reunited the entire Roman Empire, and he paved the way for a Christian empire. For the first time in decades, the Roman Empire was complete again. With so much war and barbaric invasions, it became clear to Constantine that Rome was not a secure place for the central government. He needed to find a more secure location in the empire where he could properly defend his capital. He also discovered, after converting to Christianity, that his new religion was not entirely unified. There were many different sects of Christianity, and they were at war with each other.
In 325 CE, with the ascension of Constantine to the throne of the entire Roman Empire, and all of the persecutions of the Christians coming to an immediate stop, everyone believed this to be divine intervention. Seemingly, in a moment, the entire Roman Empire started to become a Christian empire. Several influential Christian people threw their support behind Constantine, helping to make his imperial ambition appear to be sanctioned by heaven. Constantine had an exceptional supporter, Eusebius of Caesarea. He was a bishop and a historian. He may have been the most educated Christian of his day. The two of them wanted to see a unified empire, and with that, a unified religion. The Roman Empire never had a separation between state and religion, so the concept of the emperor getting involved with the religious matters was not only accepted, it was expected. With the empire becoming more unified and more Christian, a growing debate amongst Christians threatened to rip it all apart. The origin of the debate came from Alexander, the bishop of Alexandria, and one of his presbyters, a very popular fellow by the name of Arius, who had a very serious disagreement. This disagreement was about the ultimate nature of Jesus Christ as the Word of God. Arius believed that the Word of God, Jesus, was eternal and was created by God, but also the very first thing he created. Alexander believed the Word of God, Jesus, was eternal and had always been with God, and therefore was never created. The fight became public. People took sides. Riots broke out.
Alexander had Arius removed from his position in the church. In response, Arius began furiously writing letters to all the influential people within the empire, including Eusebius, a politically connected bishop of Nicomedia, which is the capital of the eastern half of the empire, and the site of Constantine's summer palace. Alexander upped the escalation by drawing on his connections, and soon the entire Eastern Empire was in turmoil. Constantine decided to do something about this critical situation and called for a universal council of bishops to address this problem. Every bishop in the church was invited, and about 250 to 300 bishops showed up. All expenses were paid for by the state. Counting the assistants, there were about 1,500 delegates. Imagine the feelings these bishops were experiencing. Only 10 years earlier, they were being persecuted by the state. and now the emperor was paying for them to attend an ecumenical council. Some of them had been imprisoned and others had been tortured. Almost all of them had friends or loved ones who were horribly executed for believing in the Christian God. And now, here they were, all their expenses paid for and welcomed by the Emperor Constantine himself. There were three major camps in the Council of Nicaea. The first one was those who sided with Alexander. They were the minority. Then there was those who sided with Arius, small but slightly bigger than Group 1. Then there were those in the middle, the moderates. They were the majority. A speech was given by Eusebius, a different Eusebius from the first one, who gave Arius's argument. While Eusebius began to read out his argument, the crowd turned ugly. The moderates, who originally thought this debate was going to be about semantics or church politics, were shocked and angered. They started heckling Eusebius and drowning out his speech, shouting, "Heretic and blasphemer!" Someone literally ran up to him and tore his speech right out of his hands, ripped it to shreds, and stomped it into the ground.
Out of this council came the Nicene Creed, and to make things comfortable for those opposing Arius' view and create unity, a line was added to make sure everyone got on the same page. Jesus was of one substance with the Father, whatever that means. Arius and his ideas were condemned. Those who wouldn't sign off on the Nicene Creed were stripped of their bishoprics. Constantine was happy. The empire was unified, and he had the backing and blessings of the now united church. However, the Eusebius, who was so condemned at the council, was able to get back in the good graces of Constantine, and even got the emperor to promote Arian views, not the Nicene orthodoxy. He even managed to get the revival bishops exiled. When Constantine was finally baptized on his deathbed, it was Eusebius, the Arian, who performed the ceremony. So they all made up in the end. Constantine had just solved the matter concerning the soul of the empire. At least he thought he did. And now he had to look at the physical defenses of the capital. It was quickly determined that Rome was not secure enough to run the administration required to run the empire. He could rebuild the defensive walls and make the eternal city even more protected than it was right at that moment, but that would still leave it in a geographically vulnerable area, right at the epicenter of the Germanic invasions. Constantine ultimately decided it was time to completely relocate the administrative capital from Rome. That was not an easy thing to ask of the Romans. Their entire empire was built around the eternal city. The mythology of Remus and Romulus founding Rome upon 7 hills was enshrined into Roman culture. These were the descendants of the refugees of Troy. And at first there was talk of moving the capital to the ancient city of Troy in a way of returning the capital to its original home. And there might have even been construction there to prepare for this move. But in the end, Constantine decided to move the capital somewhere else.
In 330 CE, Constantine moved the capital of the Roman Empire from Rome to the Greek city of Byzantium, renaming it Constantinople, Nova Roma. This city was a perfect place for the new capital, as its position on a peninsula gave it a strategic advantage when defending against an attack. 3 of its sides were protected by water, leaving only one wall to protect it from land attacks. Constantine ordered the construction of a great wall to protect the city from siege, and then strengthened its ports, guaranteeing an endless supply of goods during war. Once the city was secure, he moved the imperial senate and all of the imperial administrative offices to Constantinople, essentially relocating everything that made Rome to the Greek world. In this city, the Roman Empire would survive for another 1,000 years. Because of this move, the Roman Empire was able to survive wave after wave of enemies, siege after siege, and miraculously would survive for another 1,000 years. But also, it meant the capital of the Roman Empire was now located in the Greek world.
Well, that's it for today. Join us next time on the history of modern Greece.
See you next time.
Stay safe and stay awesome.